Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Quirkless Deku had the Force Part 1. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see Part 2, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content and leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story JedIzuku from AO3. So let's start the video. Prologue. The Jedi Temple had been in Rome for well over 2,000 years. It is said the city was founded in 753 BCE, but even before then, the Jedi were here. Tales of Jedi bravery, victory, and defeat persisted from the earliest days of recorded history. In ancient Egypt. In ancient Greece. In the Far East. Across the Roman Empire. Throughout Europe and Africa. And even into the New World once it was discovered. They avoided picking sides and tried to stop wars before they started. They always fought when they had to. Their battle prowess was impeccable and their skills with their blades was unmatched. No one knew where the Jedi came from or how they had existed for so long, but they did. And Earth was better for it. When quirks arose, some thought the Jedi Order was obsolete. Heroes and vigilantes started keeping the peace while using abilities that could sometimes outshine the Jedi. But the Jedi kept doing what they had done since the founding of their order. They served. The Jedi Temple itself had changed over the years. Its Wikipedia page stated, with certainty, that it is the longest occupied space with the same purpose in the world. There had been fires and collapses. It was destroyed in the sacking of Rome by the barbarians in 410 CE. The Sith even launched a successful attack against the temple near the end of the Dark Ages, damaging large portions of it. But the temple was always here, and the Jedi were always here. Much like the Order, which itself it's been almost ground out of existence more than once, it persisted. It was a sacred space. There had been discussions of moving it over the years, but the hundreds of generations of Jedi who had lived and worked there infused the very ground with a potency and a deep connection to the Force. It became a thin place, where even those not trained in feeling the Force could tell. The temple stood on the Palatine Hill, which is the centermost hill of the 7 hills of Rome. The oldest. It overlooked the Roman Forum and used to be surrounded by more than just ruins. Now, it is the only active building on the hill, surrounded by the old palaces and other architectural wonders of ancient Rome. The Jedi Temple stood above all the surrounding buildings. It was a large building, but not huge. It stood less than a dozen stories tall, with large gardens surrounding it. It was walled off to prevent overeager tourists bumbling into sacred Jedi spaces. The top floor of the temple was reserved for the Jedi Council, the highest authority of the Jedi Order. Overlooking the Roman Forum, it had a magnificent view. Jedi Padawan Izuku Midoriya and his 𝐬𝐡𝐢 𝐸𝐻 sat in a waiting room outside the council chambers waiting for their summons. At first glance, the Padawan and his 𝐬𝐡𝐢 could have been mistaken for mother and child, but that was a genetic coincidence. The two green-haired Jedi sat on the padded light brown carpet and meditated. The room was Spartan but comfortable. It was old and many earthen colors decorated the walls. The furniture, several sofas, and chairs, were in good condition and fit perfectly with walls and carpet. The finest feature of the room was the wall of windows, which allowed in the light of the setting sun, washing the whole space in reds, yellows, and oranges. Izuku had been training as a Jedi since he was an infant. He grew up in Rome at the temple like all Jedi initiates and was taken as a Padawan when he was 7 by 𝐬𝐡𝐢 𝐸𝐻. Jedi training didn't focus solely on combat prowess but also on the Force, knowledge, and self-discipline. Education was also a very important facet of being Jedi, for a Jedi never stopped learning. While waiting for their audience with the Jedi Council, Izuku meditated. The Force flowed through him as he slowed his breathing and felt the peace, harmony, and serenity that could only flow over him when he was meditating. Everything was easier when meditating, all his anxiety gone, just Izuku knowing he was part of something larger than himself. Comforting him. Every time he meditated he was swimming in the Force. He could smell it, hear it, taste it. The hustle and bustle of the city and tourists around him was muted from his awareness. He could feel all the thousands of people visiting nearby ruins, but it was at the edge of his mind, unnoticed. He was focused inwards on calming himself. Izuku had always been prone to worrying. It was the largest issue he and his MSTR had to work on in regards to his personality. He was just anxious by nature. He occasionally mumbled when he was nervous. And so when the Jedi Council called him and his MSTR for a meeting, he overthought it. So he sat meditating next to the calm and comforting presence of his MSTR. She was a beacon of light, which he basked in. Time had no meaning as he meditated. Time was an unnecessary distraction which meant nothing at the moment as the calming waves of the Force washed over him. They could have sat there for a few minutes or a few hours. But however long it was, Izuku was feeling more relaxed than when their summons arrived. The door to the council chambers opened and they were ushered inside by a Padawan. The room which housed the Jedi Council was very ornate. There were 5 chairs in a semicircle and windows with the same view as the waiting room. This room had seen politicians, monsters, and angels. Every president of the United States since Truman had visited. Hitler even visited once to make demands of the Jedi, which were promptly ignored. History had been made in this room over and over again. The Jedi Council was made up of 5 members, only 4 of which were currently present. The Grand Master of the Order was named Gloria Angevin. She sat in the center seat and spoke first. "Welcome, my friends." Izuku and MSTR 𝐬𝐻𝐬 bowed low to the council. MSTR 𝐬𝐻𝐬 said, "Summoned, we have come." The Grand Master smiled. She looked to be in her early 70s, fair white skin wrinkling slightly, but she was tall, thin, and athletic. Izuku thought she could be described as handsome but quickly pushed his extraneous thoughts to the side to focus on the moment. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. I hope you are both recovered from your last mission to South Africa. It ended more violently than we would have expected." "We are, MSTR. While the mission was not what we expected, both my Padawan and I were able to handle the situation." Izuku felt like wincing because that was a bit of an overstatement on his MSTR's part. Granted, the mission was not a failure, but Izuku had disobeyed his MSTR's orders after violence had broken out. She told him to flee, but he did not. Rather, he hid with a rebel group and organized the successful completion of the mission and also rescuing his MSTR from a prison camp. MSTR 𝐬𝐻𝐬 had been livid with Izuku when he showed up at her cell door with her lightsaber and 3 rebels. But all's well that ends well. Well, after his sanction was completed. He had just finished 3 months of penance, no missions or anything fun. Just studying and training. And more training. It had been boring but also very fulfilling, as his skills had improved significantly, especially his telekinesis. His MSTR had been adamant that his telekinesis skill be top-notch, and Izuku didn't know why. MSTR Angevin looked at Izuku. "And you, young Padawan, if I recall your last mission led to some interesting circumstances." Izuku took a moment to compose himself, stopping a blush, and replied, "Yes, MSTR. I have learned much since then." "And you feel you've learned from your mistakes?" "Yes." MSTR. The Grand Master smiled. "Very good, and if you've learned from your mistakes, you'll not repeat them." "Of course not, MSTR." There was a pause while Izuku debated adding something else, and his tongue got the best of him, "Unless I have to." The Grand Master laughed and Izuku felt amusement from most of the rest of the council, as well as slight annoyance from his MSTR. He tried to will his body not to flush as the MSTR Angevin looked at MSTR 𝐬𝐻𝐬 with a small smile. "This is truly your student, my dear old Padawan." Izuku's MSTR looked up with a small smile and said, "I only am able to pass on what I learned from my own, very old MSTR." MSTR Gloria Angevin looked at 𝐬𝐻𝐬 with the same sort of fondness that 𝐬𝐻𝐬 looked at him sometimes. It was not easy to forget that his own MSTR's MSTR was MSTR Angevin. "Let's get a move on," said MSTR Torque after clearing his throat. He was a dark-skinned African council member said. "We don't have all day to socialize." Izuku could have sworn he saw MSTR Angevin roll her eyes as her face turned serious. "Indeed. We have a mission for you and your Padawan, Knight 𝐀𝐦 𝐍𝐴𝐭. The Grandmaster looked at Izuku. How is your Japanese, Padawan? Izuku blinked at the seeming non sequitur. It is very good. I am Japanese by birth, and to honor my ancestors I made the point of learning it as well as I could. Very good, we were hoping that your file was correct on this matter. This would have been much more difficult if you were not familiar with Japanese. For this mission, you will be the key, young Izuku. It could be long-term, and could be constituted as your trials, depending on how long it goes, what happens, and how you do. Izuku felt proud of himself that his jaw did not hit the floor. My trials. But I'm only 15. This mission could last you 3 years. Or longer. What do you know of hero culture in Japan, Padawan? Izuku blinked at the question. He did enjoy learning about heroes and quirks. Jedi didn't have quirks, for some reason, only those without quirks could access the Force in the ways of the Jedi. The Force itself was present in all people, in all things, it bound everything and everyone together. But only those with the proper sensitivity could access the Force. Well, heroes are very prevalent in Japan. More so than in most other counties. Some of the strongest heroes in the world call it home. All Might is probably the single strongest hero of all time, and he is very prolific in his hero work, though judging from news stories, he is slowing down. Some rumors suggest he may retire in the next few years. But heroes, in general, have a huge part to play in the culture of modern Japan. From high schools for potential heroes to huge and coordinated villain attacks. There was an interesting study in Foreign Affairs 2 months ago about the prevalence of heroes sometimes bringing forth more villains than in other areas. In the US, for example, the police are highly armed and thus heroes are needed far less than in Japan, and villains tend to turn up dead before they get S-class statuses. Quirks are also highly regulated in Japan, and 𝐬𝐴𝐻 coughed and Izuku realized he had been rambling a little. In the Jedi Council chambers. He glanced at his 𝐬𝐴𝐻, who he could tell was trying to keep a straight face. So it seems you know a fair bit, Padawan. That's very good. Your mission will be to move to Mizudafu, Japan and attend UA High School. The augurs of the order have seen that Japanese hero society will soon be somehow involved in Sith machinations. They are not sure how or why, but they know All Might is somehow involved. The order has learned that All Might will be teaching at UA in the next school year, and thus we will send you there to be a hero and to get close to him. Izuku blinked. This sounded really like a really cool mission. But why would a Jedi attend a Japanese hero school? 𝐬𝐴𝐻 smiled. Well, one would not, of course. That's why you won't be a Jedi at UA. Rather you will be a student with a powerful telekinetic quirk. We have an identity for you and 𝐀𝐦. Thankfully you look alike enough to pass as mother and son, so you will be moving to Japan from America to fulfill your dream of becoming a hero like All Might. Izuku was glad his American accent was one of his better ones. His British sounded like he was making fun of the king or something. He looked at his 𝐬𝐴𝐻. Is this why we were practicing my telekinesis so much these past few months? Yes, this mission has been in the works for a while now, Padawan. Your identities have been made and we will be moving to Japan now so you can practice your spoken Japanese and kanji before the entrance exam in a few months. 𝐀𝐦 will be homeschooling you until then, and she will be assigned to missions around Southeast Asia as her schedule permits. The Grandmaster paused. This will be a very difficult mission. You cannot give away that you are a Jedi except under the direst of circumstances. Your lightsaber should always be on your person, but you can never use it until the Sith make their move. Knowing a Jedi is at UA will make the Sith more cautious, or perhaps, less so. It needs to play out as well as it can without the enemy knowing of our presence. Izuku paused. This was going to be a difficult mission. I will try my best, but may I ask why you chose me? I'm sure there are other Padawans who would be able to do as good, if not a better job. 𝐬𝐴𝐻 smile faded slightly. Do or do not, there is no try. And you should have more faith in yourself, young Padawan. Your background plus your expertise in the necessary languages made you far and away the best candidate. The Grandmaster paused. Further, some of your struggles with your emotions make you more believable as an average teenager than many other Padawans. Your MSTR will be with you for some of the mission, but you'll be alone for even more of it. It will be a test for you. And why it may count as your part or all of your trials. MSTR 𝐀𝐦 looked at 𝐬𝐻𝑒. I believe that you will be successful in this mission, 𝐬𝐻𝑒. The Force will be with you, and so will I. Hearing that his MSTR had faith in him was the push he needed. I'll do my best and I thank the Council for the faith you have in me. The Grand Master smiled. Very well then, you will leave tomorrow. Full details of your mission will be made available to you. Remember, no matter what happens or what you face, the Force will be with you, always. 𝐀𝐦 and 𝐬𝐻𝑒 bowed to the council and left the room. They had a mission to prepare for. 𝐬𝐻𝑒 decided he liked Japan. 𝐬𝐻𝑒 and his MSTR had only arrived a few days before, but it already felt comfortable for him. There were so many people and it felt so alive. The Force sang in Muzidifu, in a way it didn't in Rome. Maybe that was because people around him called it home, whereas in the part of Rome he spent most of his life there were so many tourists all the time. These were just regular people doing their regular daily things. Plus a lot of heroes everywhere, and 𝐬𝐻𝑒 did love heroes. The location of the house the order had procured for MSTR 𝐀𝐦 and him was a 20-minute walk to the school campus. It was in a very nice neighborhood, residential and quiet. Upper middle class. The house was Western-styled, it seemed to be relatively new and had all the comforts of home. Tatami made up the flooring of 2 of the rooms, but the rest just had regular hardwood floors. There was a small yard in the back which had a rock garden, where he and MSTR 𝐀𝐦 did much of his training. It was walled off from the neighbors and allowed a lot of privacy. They had a large empty windowless room in the house where they practiced their lightsaber combat and forms. The identities that the Jedi Order procured for them both were ironclad. Due to the fact the Order worked with various intelligence agencies around the world, it was easy for them to get fake identities that stood up to all the scrutiny thrown at them. Their current identities, 𝐀𝐦 and 𝐬𝐻𝑒 Midoriya, were American citizens from California. They both had passports, social security numbers, BRTH certificates, and everything else they needed to prove American citizenship. The Jedi's liaison with the government had also set up social media accounts and seeded some fake newspaper and blog articles about both of them, including the obituary of 𝐀𝐦's husband and 𝐬𝐻𝑒's father, the fictitious Hisashi. There was a little over a month until the entrance exam at UA. His application had been submitted already and he was notified via email that he was eligible to take the exam. UA, like many schools, enjoyed having foreign exchange students, so assuming that 𝐬𝐻𝑒 did well on the entrance exam, he'd probably get in. There was an additional interview he had to go through that non-foreign students did not need, just to make sure that his spoken Japanese was as good as what was tested for in the written exam. 𝐬𝐻𝑒 wasn't worried about the test, per se. He figured he had more training and experience than most other 15-year-olds out there. But it was still a bit stressful for him. He was a little bit worried about what would happen to his mission if he didn't make it in. If he failed the exam, would he go back to the Jedi Temple and be punished? His overthinking and anxiety was acting up again. While meditating one day, MSTR 𝐀𝐦 told him not to worry. Normal 15-year-olds applying to high schools in Japan generally are not veterans of several foreign wars, 𝗳𝗲, 𝐬𝐻𝑒. You'll do fine. Probably better than fine, but try not to stand out too much if you can help it. You're right, Mom. Both 𝐬𝐻𝑒 and MSTR 𝐀𝐦 decided to stop calling each other by their Jedi titles. They needed to prepare for the mission to begin in earnest. I wish there was more information on the exam online. It's like there's a GG order or something. No one writes any details, just general information such as how it is easier for more physical quirks to shine as opposed to subtler ones. I assume that means it is combat-oriented, so those without combat-specific quirks are less likely to pull ahead. It seems short-sighted to me, but I don't even know if what little information on the internet is accurate, so it could be something completely different, but, 𝐬𝐻𝑒, you will be fine. Focus on the here and now. Let's finish our morning meditation and then we can work on your training for the rest of the day. Plus you'll need to study some more before the end of the day to keep up. Time passed in quiet meditation and after a while, He was adrift in the Force, and his anxiety levels had gone down like they always do when he meditates. Well done, Padawan. Your skill in meditation continues to impress me. Most your age fidget and complain when they make them meditate. I know I did. I just find it so relaxing, Mom. All my anxiety washes away into the Force. I feel less burdened. 𝐬𝐻𝐻 smiles at Izuku. You'll be a fine Jedi Knight one say, Padawan. I may not be able to say that much in the next few years, but no, it is true. Izuku nodded at her, maintaining eye contact. Now we need to work on your training. Telekinesis is almost where I want it to be. And we focused on hand-to-hand combat enough on our mission to Ecuador that a slight review should be all we need. Izuku winced. The mission to Ecuador had been brutal. Their lightsabers had been confiscated by the local, well-armed, warlord/governor, and they completed the rescue mission unarmed. It had been difficult but not impossible. And his unarmed combat skills were greatly improved. Izuku never voiced his thoughts, that 𝐬𝐻𝐻 allowed their lightsabers to be taken so they had to work on hand-to-hand combat, but he figured it was the kind of logical ruse that Jedi like to use on unsuspecting Padawans. The training wasn't bad, it was just a lot. He thought his grasp of telekinesis was pretty good before they arrived in Japan. Not at 𝐬𝐻𝐻's level, but pretty good for a 15-year-old. 𝐬𝐻𝐻, Izuku had a strong time calling her mom in his head still, was ferocious in the training. But he was getting a lot better. Yesterday he has been able to freely manipulate 5 mid-sized stones in their back garden independently of each other. Much like patting your head and rubbing your stomach, having the control to move 2 different objects in different ways was strong enough, let alone 5. He was mindful of each rock but focused on the whole as well as each individual rock. That was how he was able to control so many moving pieces. That and the fact that practicing one skill for 6 hours a day tended to make you somewhat decent at it. He made his way towards the backyard when 𝐬𝐻𝐻 stopped him. You're fine control at a good place. We're going to have to work on the size of objects you lift. Come. They put their shoes on and left the house, heading for the nearby train station. The Jedi did purchase a wonderfully located house for them. It was pretty much close to everything in town. They boarded an eastbound train and got off at the stop labeled Dagobah Municipal Beach Park. It was also the end of the line. Izuku had never been to this part of town before, so he was curious as to what was going on. It was made clear quickly that Dagobah Beach was a dump. Literally. It was covered in trash. Not just garbage, but junk too. Old appliances, furniture, cabinetry, shelving. It was a mess. It was the kind of sight he'd seen before in very poor areas of various countries they'd visited during his training. But as Izuku looked around he saw it was not a poor neighborhood, just a regular middle-class one. Izuku wondered what could cause the people here to have so thoroughly trashed their beach. We didn't have big enough rocks in our garden at home to practice with. Izuku looked at his 𝐬𝐻𝐻 confused. I thought public quirk use was illegal in Japan. Oh, it is. But we'll be a ways down the beach far from anyone. And it's not like many people come here for the view. Izuku felt that was a fair point. They moved down the beach and found a spot that was somewhat out of sight to practice. This became the standard way they spent their afternoons. His 𝐬𝐻𝐻 assured him that the size of an object didn't matter and that it was only a problem inside his head, but Izuku still struggled. How could something larger be as easy to pick up with the Force as a pebble? His 𝐬𝐻𝐻 said, the Force is everywhere, Izuku. In everything. Connected. It's in the grains of sand and the largest of the junk on this beach. The size honestly doesn't matter. You must unlearn what your eyes tell you is impossible and what your eyes show you at all. When you do that, you can truly move mountains with the Force. As the weeks passed, Izuku's control improved. The larger objects were being moved around as easily as the small rocks in the garden had been. 𝐬𝐻𝐻 had him practice with them and using them to smash other items. It was a great form of stress relief to pick up a refrigerator with the Force and smash it into a giant pile of trash as strong as he could. And good practice for the entrance exam. 2 weeks before the said exam, Izuku had his meeting with the UA staff to make sure he was capable enough to take the entrance exam. He and 𝐬𝐻𝐻 had been working on getting him over a small block, where he didn't want to use the force for frivolous reasons. To a Jedi, using the force to summon an apple to him or pick up something he dropped was anathema. The height of laziness. But a 15-year-old with a telekinetic quirk would use it for everything he could. It was a bit of a mental stumbling block for the young Jedi, and his 𝐬𝐻𝐻 was sympathetic, and they worked strong to beat the ingrained behavior out of him. He enjoyed his short walk to the UA campus and entered through the main gate. The school building was huge and modern. He walked inside. Izuku was unsure of where to go, and there was no one around. The halls were empty. Classes were not being held that day, so he closed his eyes briefly and reached out to the force for prompting. He walked the direction that the force suggested and just enjoyed exploring a little. He turned the corner too quickly and ran right into a boy with white and half-red hair and a scar near his left eye. "Oh, I'm so sorry," Izuku said. "I took the turn too quickly and I didn't see you." "Obviously. I mean, if I saw you I wouldn't have run into you. Are you hurt? Do you need the nurse or anything? I think I saw the sign for that a while back. I'm fine." He paused. "Are you a recommendation student?" "Ah, no. I am supposed to be meeting President Mike about the entrance exam. I'm Izuku Midoriya, it's nice to meet you." He held out his hand to the other boy. The boy looked at Izuku's hand as if contemplating what to do and after a moment reached out to shake it, face not changing from a mask of indifference. Izuku could feel pain and coldness coming off the boy. But deep down there was fiery passion too. "I'm Shoto Todoroki. I imagine you need to head back towards the entrance for your meeting." "That makes sense. I was a bit early. Maybe that's why no one was there to meet me. I thought I'd wander around a bit to see if I could find anyone." "So you are a recommendation student. That's really cool. You must be super strong to be able to get in like that." Shoto grunted but didn't say anything. There was a slightly awkward pause and Izuku was about to say something else when he was interrupted by a voice calling, "Shoto, there you are. Why are you wasting your time here? It's about to start." "Who's this?" "Oh, hello, sir. I'm Izuku Midoriya. I'm afraid I got a bit turned around. You shouldn't wander around like this. It is a secure building and you could get in trouble. Return to the entrance until someone comes to accompany you," the not-so-friendly man said. Izuku suddenly realized that he was the hero in 𝗍𝗲. Maybe Shoto was his son. It would explain how he was powerful enough to get into a competitive school like UA on a recommendation. As the large man walked away, Izuku saw him shake his head and heard him mumble under his breath, "Foreigners. It was nice to meet you, Shoto. I hope to see you in April." Izuku turned around and started to walk away before he could see the look of mild shock on the other boy's face. He felt it in the force and winced when he realized how informal he'd been. He wasn't used to the Japanese formal naming culture just yet. He turned to apologize but the other boy was already entering a room. Izuku tried to settle his mind as he made his way back to the entrance. He knew he should have probably waited there in the first place, but when he asked the force for guidance it promoted him to go that way. He was glad it did because he got to meet one of his potential new classmates. Even if he didn't make the best first impression, what with running into him, rambling at him, and calling him by his first name. Ah well, he'd apologize in April. Arriving back at the front entrance there was a girl about his age with cloven hoofs and horns. There was also a tall man with blonde hair spiked up higher than any haircut Izuku had ever before seen in person. The blonde turned to him and said, in English, "Are you Izuku Midoriya?" Izuku smiled and replied in English, "That's me. Sorry, I got a little turned around. Are you President Mike?" "That I am, little listener." He seemed louder than the average human. "You two are the only native English speakers applying this year, so let's go to a classroom to talk." The three of them made their way to one of the nearby gigantic doors and ushered them inside. "I am going to SWCH to Japanese now if you don't mind." And if you do, you might want to consider going to a different school. The man smiled widely and paused, but neither of the two students reacted. To Japanese he said, "Okay, since you are both native English speakers, we just need to have a brief conversation with you to make sure you're ready to plus ultra. The entrance exam is completely in Japanese. English is a required subject for all students here. Though since most of you are fluent, if you pass the entrance exam, you'll probably take supplemental Japanese courses in their place. This is an opportunity for the UA staff to hear your spoken Japanese. We'll see how your reading and writing are during the exam, but for now, let's have a conversation. Pony, ladies first." For the next few minutes present Mike and the girl, Pony apparently, spoke in Japanese. She seemed pretty confident in the language and Izuku only noticed a few times where she was a little awkward in her sentence structure. "Well done, little listener. That's all we need from you, so you're free to go if you'd like." She nodded and smiled at both of them and left. "Just us now, Midoriya. How are you today?" In Japanese, he replied, "I'm well, thank you." "How are you, present Mike Sensei?" "I'm doing great. Your accent seems a little strange. Why is that?" "I'm fluent in several languages besides English and Japanese, but my accents are messed up in all of them. Too many languages in my brain are what my mother says." Izuku replied, catching himself before calling Inko his MSTR instead of his mother. He needed to keep working on that. Could be. I love languages. I teach English here at UA. What other languages do you speak besides Japanese and English? Oh, I am fluent in Italian, French, Russian and Chinese. I can converse in Arabic, Spanish, and German. I know the basics of a few more and I can read Latin. Present Mick's mouth fell open slightly and he stared at Izuku, unspeaking. After a moment he composed himself. He said, "Well, that's impressive. Do you like languages?" "I do. They're so fun and you can learn so much about a culture from knowing the language. My mom travels a lot for work, so I've been all over and I learned a bunch of the languages while living in various places. Not the Latin though, that was just for fun. After you get French and Italian down, Latin comes pretty easily. And opens up so many interesting texts to read. When Mom and I were living in Italy, I found a copy of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone in Latin and really wanted to read it. Worth it." Present Mike laughed happily at Izuku's excitement. "I'm sure. Your Japanese seems very good too, which is why we asked you here. How comfortable are you speaking it full time?" "Very. My mom and I have been doing so since we got Japan last month." Good. Keep it up, yeah." Izuku nodded. "Are there any questions you have while I'm here?" "I do have one. I am looking forward to the entrance exam. But can you give me any hints on what I should be prepared to do?" It's a closely guarded secret. We try to keep it under wraps so that everyone is on the same page." "That makes sense. I'll keep studying and practicing my quirk and hope for the best. Thank you for meeting with me today." "It was my pleasure, little listener. Your Japanese is quite good, and I look forward to having you as a student if you pass the entrance exam." Izuku bowed to the teacher and left. He thought that went well. 2 more weeks until the entrance exam. The day of UA's entrance exam was upon him. The 2 weeks following Izuku's meeting at UA with present Mike were spent training. MSTR Inko felt his telekinesis was where he needed it to be, but there were other facets of force use he needed to work on. The most important of these was stealth. Not stealth as in evading enemies and hiding, but rather hiding his use of the force from other force users. It wouldn't do for his undercover status to be ruined before he was ready. He needed to use his abilities but not have it look or feel like he was using the force. And it was pretty tricky. Force concealment was a skill that all Jedi utilized at some point in their careers. There were many different methods of hiding in the force. One Jedi teacher Izuku had at the temple could shrink his presence to such a small size, none of the initiates were able to sense him, even though he was standing right in front of them. This was not what Izuku needed. Thankfully, that skill took years to master. Rather, Izuku needed to hide that he was using the Force at all. Whenever a Jedi or Sith used the Force, there were metaphorical ripples in it. Like tossing a rock into a lake. From a distance, you couldn't tell it happened, but from up close there was a larger disturbance. The goal was to minimize the disruption and thus eliminate the ripples. Since this was an undercover operation, Izuku would need to mask his presence in the Force at almost all times. Because of this, the training strategy had been to keep it up all the time. So, for the last 2 weeks, he had kept up the Force stealth every waking moment. At first, it was difficult for him, but as he became more familiar with the feeling of keeping up the stealth screen became almost second nature. Another change for Izuku was carrying his lightsaber concealed on his person. Generally, a Jedi would just wear their lightsaber on their belt, as is tradition. Before the advent of the lightsaber, swords were sheathed on the back or hip. But Jedi almost always show their weapons. With his master's help, Izuku made some subtle modifications to his blade. It could be taken apart into 3 pieces which could each be concealed in different places in his bag or pockets. Each piece just seemed like some scarp, just a hunk of metal. He had several explanations as to why he would be carrying them in his head. To assemble the lightsaber, all he needed was about 5 seconds. Less if he used the Force's help to do it. He felt naked knowing that his saber wasn't on his hip or readily available. It had been there almost constantly since he built it in the Grotta Su Marmuri in Sardinia, where Jedi find their lightsaber crystals. But Izuku figured he didn't need his lightsaber in an emergency on this mission, at least not right away. How likely was a villain and Sith attack early in the school year? He'd adapt. Finally, it was time to leave for the exam and his master met him at the door. I would say good luck, but I know you don't need it. Remember, try not to stand out. The Force will be with you, Padawan. Thank you, master. It is a testament to your teaching that the council thought I was capable of successfully completing this mission. Izuku bowed low. His master smiled at him and ruffled his always messy green hair and hurried him out the door. The walk to UA was not long and before he knew it, he was in front of the huge building again. Izuku paused for a moment to collect himself with the help of the Force and then continued forward. He wasn't quite as collected as he needed to be because he immediately tripped over his own feet. He prepared to catch himself with the Force, but before he could act he felt a light slap on his shoulder and he started floating. Hi. Sorry, I used my quirk on you without asking, but I didn't want you to fall, a bright and cheery voice said. I appreciate it, Izuku replied with a smile. After she released her power, a very cool one in Izuku's opinion, they both continued into the school for the written portion of the exam. After registering and getting to the classroom for the academic portion of the test, he waited as the room filled. Exactly on time, the test booklets were handed out and off Izuku went. The test was not easy, but it wasn't overly difficult for him either. He knew most of the material, but there was an added burden of him translating all his answers into Japanese. He certainly aced the English section. He felt comfortable with his work and was done well before the time limit expired. After everyone was dismissed, they gathered together in a large auditorium. Seating was assigned and he was seated next to a blue-haired boy with a serious demeanor. Izuku nodded to him as he sat down and said hello and the boy nodded back, not saying anything. Izuku quietly meditated, not deeply, keeping his awareness on the here and now as the room filled. He could feel that almost everyone around him was very nervous, but he did not let their feelings affect him. President Mike walked in and stood in the center of the stage. He didn't use a microphone, nor did he need one. He explained the rules of the different robots having different point scores, and it seemed easy enough. They were also given a print out with the information. Excuse me, sir, but I have a question. The blue-haired boy next to him said loudly. Izuku couldn't help noticing that he was gesturing rather enthusiastically as he spoke. Hit me, President Mike said. On the printout, you've listed 4 types of villains, not 3. With all respect, if this is an error on official material, it is shameful. We are exemplary students, we expect the best from Japan's most notable school. A mistake such as this won't do. Izuku's eyes widened a little at the phrasing of the question but assumed the other boy was just nervous. Thanks for calling in with your request, examinee number 7111, Present Mike gave him a thumbs up. The fourth villain type is worth 0 points. That guy's just an obstacle we'll be throwing in your way, Present Mike explained. There's one in every battle center. Think of it as a hurdle you should try and avoid. It's not that it can't be beaten, but there's kinda no point. As the boy thanked Present Mike, Izuku felt that the explanation didn't make much sense. Why would they bother to have a useless robot at this test unless there was an ulterior motive? He pushed the thoughts aside and decided he'd ignore it, per the instructions, unless the situation called for something different. They were loaded onto buses and moved to various testing facilities. The boy he sat next to in the auditorium was on his bus as well as the girl with the gravity quirk from earlier. Izuku spent his time meditating and letting go of his anxiety and any fear he had. And to be fair, he did feel a little, but with his training, he knew not to act on it. He could do this. He could do this well. He would do this. They got off the bus and he stood ready. He was submerged in the force, waiting for any promptings as Present Mike stood by the entrance and looked at his watch. Okay, go. The yellow-haired hero said, and Izuku dashed forward, augmenting his speed with the force, leaving the other participants in the dust. The force prompted him to go left and he found a street swarming in robots. Using the force, he lifted a one-pointer in front of him and smashed it as strong as he could into the three-pointer behind it, destroying both. He dodged the attack of another three-pointer and grabbed it with his telekinesis and smashed into a nearby wall. More testers had arrived in his area by now and many of the robots were engaged. Izuku moved further away from the crowd searching for more robots when the force prompted him to look right. He saw a blonde boy firing a laser from his belly button. His back was to Izuku and there was a three-pointer locking onto him from the blonde's right side. The blonde didn't notice the robot so Izuku used the force and acted. Mon Dieu! The blonde yelped as he was hastily, but gently, pulled out of the line of fire of the blast from the three-pointer. Once he regained his senses he blasted the offending robot with his laser and saw that Izuku had saved him. He said, "Merci beaucoup, mon ami." Izuku wondered why a boy was speaking French during a Japanese high school entrance exam, but just smiled back at him and said, "De rien, mon ami." The blonde looked delighted that Izuku understood him, bowed and they went their separate ways. Izuku was at 40-something points by his math. He figured that was about all he needed to do to get in and to not make too many waves. He helped a few other examinees who just needed a little assistance here and there, but none so dramatic as the blonde French boy. His MSTR would be pleased. Then suddenly the earth shook. At first, Izuku thought it was an earthquake, but he turned and saw a massive robot menacing over the faux city. That was the zero-pointer. He could see why Present Mike told them to avoid it. Izuku started to make his way back towards the entrance. As he got to the main street, other students were running away from the huge robot in fear. He didn't blame them, it was a rather frightening sight. As he started walking away, the force prodded him to look in a certain direction and he saw the girl who caught him when he tripped earlier. She was directly in the path of the zero-pointer but unable to move due to her leg being stuck under some of the rubble from the zero-pointer's entrance. He didn't know why she wasn't using her quirk on the debris holding her down but guessed she could be out of juice. Well, Izuku couldn't just leave her there. He turned and ran towards where she was stuck, passing fleeing participants. When he arrived at the girl's location, the giant robot was getting very close. "Don't worry," he said to the girl with more confidence than he honestly felt. "I've got this." There was rubble all around him. Some pieces smaller than others. He reached out with the force and picked up several of the largest he could manage, including the piece pinning the girl down. He was straining, but the force was singing around him. BLD was in his ears. He pushed one piece of the rubble with all of his telekinetic might, gesticulating with his hands, at the robot's face. Then another. And another. He picked up another large chunk as he threw one more towards the robot's head. The face was sparking wildly, dented and deformed. He hurled 2 more chunks of rubble at it, aiming slightly lower because there was not much of a face left. At that point, the 0-pointer reared back and was stumbling. 𝐬𝐸 gave up on the rubble and just pushed the robot with all his telekinetic might, and it could no longer maintain its balance. There was a loud crash and the 0-pointer was on its back in an area it had already destroyed. Collateral damage could be a pain and he wanted to avoid it if possible. Its legs were twitching but it was unable to get back up. So much for avoiding the hurdle. 𝐬𝐸 let out a breath and walked over to the girl from before, offering her a hand up. "Are you hurt?" She was staring at him with wide eyes as he helped her up. "My ankle, it's hurt but I think it's only sprained." 𝐬𝐸 nodded. "Let's get you to wherever the medical people are." Not even 3 seconds after they started moving, President Mick's voice came over the loudspeaker and announced that time was up. 𝐬𝐸 helped the girl towards the entrance. "Thank you for the help, you've got an amazing quirk, thank you. It's not as flashy as some, but telekinesis gets the job done. I'm 𝐬𝐸 Midoriya." She was cut off from saying anything else as a small older woman walked up to them and asked, "Is anyone here injured?" Uraraka explained her ankle and the woman her and handed them both some candy. "That wasn't too bad, dear. You may be a little more tired than normal tonight. Make sure to get a full night's sleep and no running any marathons for a few days." 𝐬𝐸 was exhausted. Even after one of his most intense training sessions with his MSTR, he'd never used the force so much in such a short period of time. He hoped it was enough. Waiting had never been a strong point of 𝐬𝐸's. He was the kind of person who liked to act. This was a great trait for a Jedi to have, normally. But when waiting a week or 2 for exam results, it was annoying. He spent most of the weight training with his MSTR on lightsaber forms. He was also working on assembling and disassembling his lightsaber as quickly as possible. Muscle memory was very important for that type of thing. 𝐬𝐸 always enjoyed lightsaber training. He found something very calming about going through katas and feeling the force flow around him. Intentional movements, it was almost a dance. He was working on his Sorisu, 𝐬𝐸's preferred form, when the mail arrived a week and a half after the exam. He heard the bell ring and the soft sound of a thunk from the front door. He extinguished his lightsaber and left it in the training room and walked to the door. There was an envelope from UA in the pile. It was kind of misshapen and crumpled. He ignored the rest of the mail. His MSTR walked into the room and he looked at her and smiled. He opened the envelope and inside was a circular disc. He picked it out of the envelope and carefully placed it on the table in the dining room. It lit up without promoting and President Mick's face was suddenly in front of him. "Bonjour my multilingual little listener. You've probably been nervously waiting for this letter since the exam, haven't you? Well, have no fear because your results are here. Let's take a look. First, you scored excellently on the written test. Your Japanese grammar was better than many of the native speakers and your answers were more right than wrong. Pass." 𝐬𝐸 smiled at that. He figured he did well on the written exam. He just hoped that he got enough points in the practical. He knew he could have gotten more but didn't want to stand out. "Before we move on, watch this." The scene on the hologram changed to Uraraka talking to President Mike. "Sir, I wanted to make sure the boy who helped me, Midoriya, had enough points to get in. He saved me from the 0-pointer and I'm sure he could have gotten more points if he didn't stop to help me." 𝐬𝐸 smiled at the girl. Maybe they'd be friends if they both got in. One of the most important parts of being a hero is inspiring others. Heroes can't save everyone, but we can inspire others to be heroic and even help out. You did this, and while we only told you that the practical exam was based on the points you get from destroying robots, there was a hidden criterion. Rescue points. You received 46 villain points for destroying robots, which on its own would have been enough to get you into UA's hero course comfortably. But because of your heroism in saving not just that girl, but several others as well, we award you 75 rescue points. That brings you to a total of 121 points. That's the highest score this year, and the higher score anyone has gotten in over 20 years. Well done. Welcome to your hero academia. See you in April. Plus Ultra. The hologram went black and Izuku looked at his MSTR who was smiling at him. Well done, Padawan. Izuku smiled back and said, I did it. I never doubted you. However, I do need to say, so much for staying under the radar, Mr. Highest score in 20 years. Izuku blushed. They didn't say anything about rescue points in the instructions. I just saw people who needed help and so I helped them. I didn't want them to get hurt. Mr. Inko's smile widened. I know, Padawan. I'm proud of you. I'll inform the council of your success and we'll keep working to get you ready for your first day of school. Time flew by between when Izuku got his acceptance and early April when school was slated to start. Izuku and his MSTR spent most of their time training and he felt more than ready to attend UA and complete his mission. When his first day dawned, Izuku and Mr. Inko had breakfast together. Today is the day, Padawan. You're going to very well, I know it. Thank you, Mr. I do have some news for you. Oh. I have a mission to Taipei starting on Thursday. I shouldn't be gone long, but now that your intensive training is over and school has started, I will begin to be assigned to missions nearby. The council will keep me in this part of the world, and somewhat connected to civilization in case the school calls or anything happens. Izuku nodded and understood. His mission only really needed his focus. His MSTR was an experienced Jedi who was needed elsewhere. How long will you be gone? Oh, only a few days. Diplomatic talks between Taipei and Beijing. Yuck. Mr. Inko smiled at him. Indeed, but boring meetings are better than open conflict. Now, she paused. Since I am pretending to be your mother for the next little while, I feel the need to say, no wild parties here while I'm gone. Izuku's eyes widened. I wouldn't. I mean, I don't even know anyone here and why would I have a party? Padawan, I was teasing. Parents and Jedi are entitled to it. Now you'd best be off. Don't want to be late on your first day. He made the walk to school in good time and soon stood before the door to his new classroom. 1A. Like all the other doors, it seemed very large. Larger than needed. Maybe for students with gigantification quirks and the like. Upon opening the door and entering the room, the blue-haired boy he sat next to at the exam was there, yelling and gesturing with his hands awkwardly at another student for having feet on the desk. He glanced around the room and saw that seating was assigned and saw his spot was behind the blonde boy who had his feet on the desk. He was still a bit early for class to start, so he figured he didn't need to sit down quite yet and went to drop his bag off at his seat. He walked over. The girl he helped at the exam walked in, saw him and said, Midoriya. That was your name, right? I'm 𝐀𝐦 𝐍𝐨𝐭. From the exam. Izuku smiled at her and said, I remember, but call me Izuku. The last name thing is too formal for my tastes. Okay. You're American, right? Izuku nodded. It makes sense if you are less formal. I am happy to call you whatever you're comfortable with, but you'll have to excuse me if I slip up from time to time. She smiled at him and said, Of course, I'm 𝐸. Pleasure to meet you, 𝐸, and to put a name with your face. She smiled brightly at him and looked to say, but Izuku saw a boy he knew walk in, with half red and half white hair. He called out, Shoto. I mean Todoroki. Todoroki-kun. Izuku stumbled over the name. Sorry, I mean I want to apologize for being so informal that time we met. I am still not used to the Japanese name rules. Shoto. Todoroki. Blinked at him, as if caught off guard. It's fine. I know they are different from other countries. Great. What should I call you then? I don't want to annoy or offend you. I don't care one way or another. Izuku, missing that the other boy was trying to blow him off, said, Great, I'll call you Shoto then. I hope we can be friends. Shoto just stared at Izuku, and Izuku went a little red in the face. I mean, if that's okay with you. It's fine. But I'm not here to make friends. That stopped Izuku short. belatedly realizing their conversation had been held over half the classroom and almost everyone was staring at them. Right, that makes sense. We're here to learn to be heroes, but if we make some friends along the way, all the better, right? Well said, man. A boy with red hair spiked up and shark teeth said. I'm Kirishima. Izuku turned his attention to the boy and smiled back. Izuku Midoriya, but call me Izuku. The other boy smiled at him and a blonde he recognized walked in and saw Izuku and said, Mon ami. Merci encore. Parlez-vous français? Izuku was still confused about why a boy was speaking French at UA High School in Japan. But just went with it. Oui, je parle français. But also Japanese if that's easier. Oui, I speak Japanese too, but it's so nice to hear my mother tongue spoken so well. Je suis Yuga Aoyama. Nice to meet you. I'm Izuku Midoriya, but call me Izuku. How do you two know each other? Uraraka asked from her seat. Oh, he saved my life during the exam. Izuku blushed. I'm not sure your life was in danger, but I did pull him out of the way of the blast of a three-pointer. The blue-haired boy had finished scolding and arguing with the blonde and introduced himself. It's a pleasure to meet the person with the highest exam score. You saw the true purpose of the exam better than any of us. I'm 𝐀𝐦 𝐍𝐸. I'm not too sure about that. I had no idea rescue points were a thing. I just helped people when they needed it. Before anyone could respond, the door banged open and a yellow sleeping bag was moving slowly across the floor. Izuku thought this might be their teacher. Maybe their quirk was related to a sleeping bag. He moved to his seat just in case. Settle down. Homeroom is starting. All the students moved quickly to their seats. Izuku felt that the teacher's eyes were on him for some reason. He seemed very tired and Izuku had no idea what he'd done to make the man suspicious. It took 12 seconds for you to settle down. That's wasted time. If you are just here to socialize, you can go home. I'm Shota Aizawa, your homeroom teacher. Go to the locker room and put these on and meet on the PE fields. We're having a quirk assessment test. What about orientation and the welcoming ceremony? One student asked. It's a waste of time. Move it. After everyone was changed and they found the PE fields, happily situated just outside the locker rooms. Aizawa had them line up and he said, Midoriya. You received the highest score in the entrance exam, come here. The teacher indicated a circle on the ground. In your physical education classes in middle school, you were not allowed to use your quirks in fitness tests. What was your highest score in the softball throw? Izuku paused. He'd never gone to Japanese middle school and this kind of test was not something the Jedi dealt with. My middle school didn't do this kind of test, Aizawa-sensei. I would guess somewhere between 60 and 70 meters. The tired teacher's face didn't change. Fine, throw this but use your quirk however you feel like to get the most distance. Izuku nodded as he caught the ball that his teacher had thrown at him. He held it in his hands and closed his eyes and let himself feel the ball in the force. He tossed the ball in the air once, caught it and then tossed it in the air again. It didn't land this time, it hovered a foot above his palm and began to spin quickly. He moved his hand so it was no longer under the ball. His shoulders moved back as he straightened, he took a deep breath and he pushed with all his telekinetic might. The ball shot forward at about a 40-degree angle and he kept focusing on moving the ball. Now and again he pushed it a bit further until it was too far away for him to reach. He looked at Aizawa-sensei. He held out the ball reader and it said 1,209 meters. Izuku was happy with himself, it seemed like a good score. This is what you can do when you use all your efforts. Now we'll start with the 50-meter dash. And so they did. Small groups of students raced each other using their speed as much as they could while robots timed everything. Some struggled with it if they didn't have speed quirks or physical quirks. Izuku felt bad for the short purple boy who had to take 2 steps for his one. His time was over 10 seconds and his quirk didn't seem to help him at all. Izuku felt a little less bad for him after he heard the purple boy complain loudly about the tests. When it was Izuku's turn, he used the force and sped off for the finish line. He didn't go as fast as he could because Ida had a specific speed quirk, so being him would be suspicious. Instead, he settled for 4.9 seconds, or 1.5 seconds slower than Ida. The grip strength test was an interesting one for Izuku. The boy with several extra arms seemed very strong, and Izuku was impressed by his 540 kilograms score. Quirks were so fascinating. Using the force, Izuku let the grip measurer float above his palm and he used his telekinesis on both sides. He could have gone harder if he wanted to, but there were a lot of tests left and getting 332 kilograms was pretty decent. The standing long jump was a bit of a dilemma for Izuku because he was sure he could make short work of it with a forced jump, but he didn't know if it was worth the risk. He didn't think his telekinesis could get him that far. So he decided to just take a small forced jump and he cleared the sandbox by about 7 meters. There were some crazy quirk uses in this event. The French boy, 𝐀𝐦 used his belly button laser to propel himself backward in an interesting display of grace and insanity. The angry blonde, who fittingly could make his hands explode, used those explosions to almost fly a decent distance. The repeated side steps were something he couldn't use the force for directly, so he just used his regular fitness abilities, augmented by the force, so he tired slower and scored near the top. One boy with purple ball on his head went forever just bouncing back and forth between two piles until Aizawa-sensei eventually stopped him. Then they got to the ball throw and Izuku thought he'd not have to go, but everyone got 2 attempts here and so he went again. He figured he'd redo the same method as last time and see if it went further. Uraraka had already blown everyone's score out of the water with her infinite throw, and wasn't that impressive. Izuku wondered if it was only infinite if she kept her quirk active or if there was a range where it would just stop being affected. Either way, it was seemingly in orbit so it could go for a very long time. Izuku stepped up to the center of the circle again and was lifting the ball when a sudden ominous feeling came over in him, the force. He dropped the ball on instinct, feeling danger. It hit the ground as he looked around, alert. He looked over as Aizawa-sensei said, "I've erased your quirk." While speaking, the scarf that the teacher wore around his neck came to life and sprang at Izuku. Instinctively he dodged to the side, but the scarf was very nimble and grabbed him by the midsection and delivered directly in front of the Aizawa. Izuku was at a bit of a loss. He could fight his way out if he wanted to. The scarf wouldn't hold a Jedi for long, but the sight of his homeroom's teacher's hair floating and eyes glowing red gave him pause. This was Eraserhead. The fact the teacher said that his quirk was erased made more sense now. Izuku was glad the force warned him and so he dropped the ball when the teacher's quirk activated. If that didn't happen, Izuku would have some explaining to do. What were the odds that the one teacher who could tell for certain he didn't have a quirk to erase? Could he tell that Izuku didn't have a quirk? He reached out to the force to calm his panic. It worked. To a certain extent. You are an enigma, Midoriya. And I do not like enigmas. Especially in first-year high school students. Izuku replied, lost. What had given him away? Todoroki, Yaoyorozu, and even Bakugo have exceptional control over their quirks. Their training shines through, but do you know what you have that they don't? Izuku was still completely lost and just went with, no sensei. Experience. The way you fought in the entrance exam. The way you use your quirk in some of these tests. It goes beyond mere training. You have instincts that should not be present in a first-year hero course student. It's not your quirk. I checked, it is a simple telekinetic quirk. There is no mention of any telepathy or foresight to give you warning. And yet you show no hesitation whatsoever. You have the grace of a seasoned warrior. Why is that? Okay, so his teacher didn't know exactly what was up, but he knew something was up. This was bad, but not the end of the world. He could salvage this. I have no idea, sensei. I just trust my instincts, I guess. Your instincts told you the weak spot on the 0-pointer in the entrance exam. Well, its head had some lights on its face, I figured there was a better than even chance that there were some control systems in the head. I don't know what to tell you. Aizawa grunted, bored expression unchanged. Fine. I'm watching you, and if any vigilantes with quirks similar to yours appear, you'd best have a rock-solid alibi or 3. Oh, thank the force, Izuku thought. He thinks he's a vigilante. He can work with that. Mostly because he was not one. I'm not. I mean, I haven't ever done any work as a vigilante here or abroad. If you'd like a list of places I've visited and lived around the world, I'd be happy to provide it to you, along with dates. My mom would even be happy to talk to you if you don't believe me. Izuku didn't see his teacher's face change, but in the force, he felt a little bit of doubt enter the man's presence. Aizawa grunted again and his eyes stopped glowing and his hair fell into his face messily. Throw the ball. Izuku swallowed as the scarf let him down and he walked over to the circle and picked up the ball where it fell. He repeated the process from before, a little distracted from the insane conversation and manhandling. He should have paid more attention because his throw had a bit too much power in it and the ball went 1706 meters, which was about 500 more than it had gone the first time. No. One commented, especially after the infinity score from earlier. Uraraka approached him while they were walking to where the long-distance run was to start on the track and asked him, what was that about with Aizawa-sensei? No idea. He wanted to ask about my quirk. Not sure why he didn't just, ask like a regular person. Uraraka laughed and smiled at him. I'm glad you're not in trouble. You don't have to worry about getting last in the test, so it would be a shame if you got expelled too. Izuku smiled back and thanked her. The long-distance run was not difficult for him. He used force speed and also augmented his stamina slightly, so at the end he came in third, after Ida and a girl who somehow pulled a motorcycle out of her body. That might have been the most insanely cool quirk he'd ever seen. He would try to grill her later on the specifics. For some reason, the next test was a seated toe touch. And there were no tricks he had to improve his score on that one, but due to all his training and practice he had decent flexibility and so ended up near the bottom of the top 10 on this test. It was interesting, many of the students who had been near the top on all tests thus far did not fare well on this one. Finally, there was the sit-ups test. He was quite fit, but there were a few beasts of fitness in his class. So while he could have gone on if he needed to, he bowed out and got 4th place. After all the tests, they gathered again near the locker rooms and Aizawa projected their scores. Overall, Izuku gets 3rd, after Yaoyorozu and Todoroki. In 4th was Bakugo and in last was Mineta. The small purple boy was crying and pleading with Aizawa-sensei. The teacher did not seem moved at all. Well, the numbers don't lie. Mineta, you're expelled. Everyone, go get changed and return to the classroom. Mineta, go to the principal's office. The boy didn't stop crying and it was kind of harsh, Izuku thought. He didn't say anything, in an attempt to keep his head down, but a blonde boy did. Not the explosive one but the one who seemed to control electricity. Aizawa-sensei was unsympathetic. It's better it happens now on the first day. This way he won't waste his life pursuing a goal he can never achieve. It may not seem it, but it is kinder this way. The rest of you have potential, but that doesn't mean I can't or won't expel you if the need arises. The whole class was pretty shaken up at their homeroom teacher's intensity. Even the seemingly unflappable Todoroki was a little wary of Aizawa-sensei. His face was neutral as ever, but Izuku could feel unease come off him in the force, even amidst the fear and anxiety coming off the rest of the class. What are you waiting for? Get moving, Aizawa-sensei said. With that, they all went to the locker room, sans Mineta who was still crying and begging Aizawa-sensei to change his mind. Aizawa seemed unmoved and uncaring of the situation. Mostly though, tired. Izuku thought this whole mission might be a little harder than he anticipated if his homeroom teacher is already suspicious of him. It was a worry for another day. All he could do now was keep trying to be the best hero student he could be. He needed to talk to his MSTR about how he could throw off the suspicion. In the locker room, the boys were talking. Izuku didn't participate but he did listen. He glanced around observing his classmates and trying to get a better understanding of them. I can't believe Aizawa-sensei expelled a student on the first day. That same blonde who questioned their teacher earlier said. It just seems so unfair. The explosive blonde let out a derisive sound, tch. The little purple bstrd deserved it. Did you see the way he was ogling the girls? I'm pretty sure he rubbed up against that gravity girl. Aizawa-sensei probably saw that he was a perv and got rid of him before it got worse. He wasn't that bad. The other blonde defended. Most of the students seemed to be indifferent, and the explosive blonde kid, 𝗵𝘃𝗀, seemed to like arguing with anyone. Izuku was just about finished with changing when he glanced over to a corner of the locker room where Todoroki was quietly changing. He had a large bruise on the side of his chest. It was fresh, dark blue and purple. Izuku winced when he saw it. He picked up his bag and walked quietly towards the other boy. Todoroki looked up as he got closer. Quietly he said, I saw your bruise. I can help it out if you'll let me. Shoto looked a little confused as to what Izuku meant but didn't stop him when Izuku reached his hand out. Izuku touched the bruise lightly and used the force to send healing energy to the other boy's left side. The bruise disappeared from view and Izuku knew, logically, he shouldn't have done that. What kind of telekinetic quirk could heal? But he'd be able to make something up. Todoroki's eyes widened as he looked at the bruise disappear. Izuku smiled at him. There you go, Shoto. It looked pretty painful. Training accident. Todoroki nodded at him. Yeah, been there. It may still be a little sore, I just excited the cells there to heal a bit faster with my quirk. It can't do much more than bruises or cuts, but super helpful. Izuku hoped his explanation made sense. Thank you, Shoto said quietly. My pleasure. See, even though you're not here to make friends, you still can. Izuku smiled brightly at him but got the feeling from Shoto that the other boy had no idea how to deal with Izuku. Or maybe it was people in general. Izuku would keep being nice and eventually, the other boy would open up or tell him to get lost. He hoped for the former. Most of the class had left the locker room by now, and Izuku sent one more smile at Todoroki and headed back to the classroom for their afternoon classes. Not too much else happened during the day. They met some of their teachers, discussed syllabi, and then the day was over. He was going to see if Shoto wanted to walk home with him but the other boy left the classroom quickly after the bell rang. Uraraka came over to him happily and said, "Wanna walk to the train station together?" Izuku smiled back at her and said, "Sure. I don't need to take a train to get home, but where I live is right past the UA station." She beams at him and as they are leaving Ida joined with them. "What did you guys think of today?" Izuku asked them both. "It was so intense." Uraraka said. "I was nervous I'd get kicked out. I feel bad for Mineta, but well, honestly not that bad." "Why ever not?" Ida asked. It seemed an unfair and arbitrary abuse of power on Aizawa-sensei's part. Honestly, Aizawa is right. If a student has no potential to be a hero, they shouldn't waste their time. It's a high-stress job with a high mortality rate. It takes a certain kind of person to want to be a hero, let alone to be a good one. We're trusting Aizawa-sensei to train us to be heroes, so we should trust his judgment on this as well. "I agree," Uraraka said. She paused awkwardly. "He also kind of felt me up during the tests today. It was super creepy. How terribly inappropriate." Ida said, making large hand motions that almost hit Izuku if he didn't get out of the way at the last second. Yeah, he didn't seem the hero type. They chatted amicably until they got to the train station. Both Ida and Uraraka went towards the trains and Izuku turned towards home. He wasn't lying when he said the train station was on his way home, but it wasn't the quickest way to get there. He enjoyed the walk and talking to his classmates, maybe friends. Arriving at home, his MSTR was waiting for him. "Welcome home. How did it go?" "We may have a problem, but on the bright side, I think I made some friends. Good job, but what's the problem? My homeroom Aizawa sensei, felt that I was more experienced than I should be. He doesn't think I am a Jedi, but rather a vigilante. I guess it's strong to hide experience in things like the entrance exam because people could have gotten hurt and I could stop it. She smiled at him. I understand, Padawan. It is in your nature to help others, and it is not something to be ashamed of, especially if you are too good at it. But for this mission, I can see why it might cause problems. What do you think you should do? I'm not sure. Aizawa will be watching me closely. He'll probably investigate vigilantes around the world to look for me. But if I don't go at the same level, he'll call me out too. He expelled a student for having no potential, so it's a delicate balance. I think I need to act the same because I don't have anything illegal to hide. 𝐬𝐻 nodded at that and said, I think that is wise, Padawan. Changing your cover in the middle of a mission can lead to disaster. Unless he somehow suspects you're a Jedi, you should be fine. Try to see if he is trustworthy though. It would not be amiss to have an ally in the school, but only as a last resort. The more who know a secret, the more likely it is to come out. That made sense to Izuku and he said as much. It was a very tiring day and Izuku was pleased that it was over. There was something about high school that just drained him. He had done more on some days, but the high school just seems like it was going to be a chore to get through. At least some of the people seem nice. Izuku napped before he started on his homework. The second day of school for Izuku was more normal than the previous one. The morning started out with classes in core subjects that all high schoolers learn. Math, science, history, Japanese, English. Izuku was fluent in the two languages, so they were easy enough, though the Japanese class was more interesting than English because while he could speak fluently, he hadn't read much Japanese literature, so it seemed like it might be a nice diversion. The math and sciences were taught differently than he was used to, but the material was basically the same. He was a higher level in some areas and a lower level in others. The teachers were understanding and helped him out as needed. Afternoons though, that was what his classmates were looking forward to the most. He was too, honestly. Hero training. Granted, the level of training that Izuku had as a Jedi was more than most, if not all, of the students, but seeing different methods of training would be fascinating. Plus, All Might himself was the teacher for their foundational heroics class. The Jedi didn't really spend much time focusing on specific heroes, but they all knew All Might was a good one. He was well respected by the Jedi Order and had worked with them several times over the years. All in all, Izuku was excited to see what he could learn from the symbol of peace. Making a hero costume was actually a very trying task for Izuku. He was most comfortable in his Jedi robes. They were easy to wear and were what he had always worn. But they would also be a bit of a giveaway to his secret identity. After much discussion with his MSTR, he felt that he wanted to do something with an homage to the Jedi but not directly tied to their regular attire. So he spent time looking through various records on Jedi history for inspiration. He learned that Jedi has basically always worn robes. There were outliers and Jedi who decided to buck tradition and wear armor, but that was mostly in the Middle Ages or before. Add to that most of the armor was unwieldy and focused on combat or defense. For most Jedi, flexibility was often the key to successful offense and defense, so he didn't want to wear a full suit of armor. Who would? Looking around the locker room as they changed into their hero costumes, apparently, Ida would, but he said that was a family tradition. So Izuku settled for a mesh of the two ideas. The color scheme was also different. He used a green that matched his hair as opposed to the usual browns and tans of traditional Jedi robes. Instead of a full suit of armor, Izuku's costume had his arms, shoulders, legs, and feet covered in protective plating, in shiny white. Accents on this were in the same green as his overtunic, and there were designs up and down the armored sections. There was also a small chest guard that would cover the upper part of his chest. Underneath all this, he wore a black skin-tight fire and cold-resistant unitard. It was rather like long underwear, as Kirishima pointed out with a laugh. The tunic was not styled like regular Jedi tunic and was deemed by his MSTR to be unique enough to not give anything away. Finally, there was a utility belt with small pouches and hooks. There was also a small section on either side where he could hook his lightsaber if need be. It looked like a design accent instead of a useful part of the costume itself. As Izuku stretched before the practical portion of their lesson, he found his flexibility was not hindered at all by the costume, which was part of his specification for it. Having a telekinetic quirk really didn't require anything besides shorts and a t-shirt, but he wanted to look like a high school-aged hero, and so had to look cool. Flexibility was also important in case he needed to use any hand-to-hand combat during hero fights or bring out his lightsaber, which was safely hidden inside the costume. The class was gathered and they were waiting for the arrival of the teacher. Some of the class was a little antsy because they were ready to do something active after being in their desks all day. Honestly, Izuku was ready too. The life of a Jedi was seldom sedentary. "Wow, that's a great costume, Midoriya." "Thanks, I like yours too, Uraraka. Though it's always interesting to me how, form-fitting female costumes can get. Tell me about it. I was expecting more of a spacesuit than a bodysuit." They were interrupted from their conversation by the door banging open and All Might bounding and saying, "I am here," walking through the door like a normal person. Izuku blinked. All Might was a lot of things, but a normal person he was not. The force rolled off him was as if he was more than one person. Larger than life. His form was impressive but his presence was almost overwhelming. Izuku understood how this man could be a symbol, even without using the force in his presence. The teacher explained that they would be divided up into pairs randomly and fight each other, as heroes or villains. Heroes either needed to capture the villains or touch the weapon before the time was up. Villains needed to protect the weapon or capture the heroes. All Might also assured them they would not be expelled if they lost. Which was good to know, but Izuku didn't really expect it, even after the explosion yesterday. If they kept up that rate of expulsion, the hero course would be empty by the end of April. All Might drew lots and the teams were randomly assigned. Izuku was hoping for one of his friends to be his partner and was happy when it was Shoto. Izuku smiled at the other boy who had the same unimpressed expression that he usually wore. At least he didn't seem angry at the assignment of partners. Izuku reached out with the force and felt that Shoto was almost indifferent to the whole situation, which was interesting. They'd be friends by the end of his mission, Izuku would make sure of that. He walked over to Shoto and smiled and said, "This will be interesting. I'm glad we can watch the other teams, seeing them use their quirks is fascinating, isn't it?" Izuku wasn't sure if Shoto was covering a sigh in response, but All Might said their team would going first against Bakugo, Ida, and Ishido. Because there were 19 people in the class, one team had 3 people. In this case, the team facing Izuku and Shoto. They were given a few minutes to prepare. Izuku said to Shoto, "Well, we are at a disadvantage here, 3 against 2. But we can still win. Do you have any thoughts on how to do this?" Shoto looked calm. "I can freeze the whole building and just walk to the bomb." Izuku paused. "I mean, that could work, but it could also do more harm than good. If the bomb is on the top floor, it will take forever to go up all the stairs if they are covered in ice. Plus Bakugo could explode his way out of ice, Ishido could possibly melt it with her acid, and I am not sure how hot Ida's exhausts get, so he could potentially break out too. I think overwhelming force can work sometimes, but I suggest something different." Shoto at least looked mildly interested now. He quirked an eyebrow that Izuku took to mean go on. "Divide and conquer." Bakugo doesn't seem to be a team player, from his behavior yesterday. He might go off on his own and leave the bomb guarded by the other 2, or they may make their own plan. I say we start out stealthily and see if we can spot Bakugo or anyone else alone and capture them and move on. Maybe we can take out 2 of them that way, but I'm not sure. I doubt Ida would leave the bomb, but at least we'll be on even footing if we take one of them out early. Shoto nodded and said, "Fine. Do you want to take point?" "Sure, I have good reaction times and I can work short or long range and you seem more of a long-range fighter." Their discussions were cut off by All Might announcing that their time was starting now. Izuku went in first. The force was not warning him of anything and he used his force sense to see if anyone was nearby. He felt two people on the 5th floor and one coming down the stairs quickly towards a nearby staircase. Izuku smiled and made a hand motion to 𝐲𝗏 to hide around the corner from the door. Izuku hid in an exposed place that would be covered by the door opening outward. When the person, 𝗵𝘃𝗀 probably, came out, neither he or 𝐲𝗏 would be in sight. After a moment the door swung open and Izuku was a little surprised at the force of it, but it didn't bump into his face like he initially thought it might. It did hit his boots, which he was glad he had reinforced. He heard an annoyed grunt that was certainly from 𝗵𝘃𝗀, probably because he couldn't see anyone, and as the door started to close, Izuku reached out to the force and waited. The moment the door closed, Izuku could see 𝗵𝘃𝗀's back and he used his telekinesis and to pick the other boy up gently by grasping his whole midsection equally to distribute the pressure and not hurt him. He'd seen a video back at the Jedi Temple of a Sith lifting people by choking them. He didn't ever want to hurt someone like that. His actions caused 𝗵𝘃𝗀 to exclaim, "What the F?" Izuku just held him hovering above the ground unable to move and called to 𝐲𝗏 to use the capture tape. 𝗵𝘃𝗀 was struggling against his hold, but it was futile because he couldn't get any traction on the ground or walls. And even if he did, Izuku's grip was like iron. He was able to move his arms and legs but that was all, and if need be Izuku could stop that too. 𝐲𝗏 came from around the corner in front of 𝗵𝘃𝗀 with capture tape in his hands. 𝐓𝐴𝐻𝐷. Back off of I'll blow your face off, you icy hot bastard. 𝐲𝗏 doesn't even slow his approach, but he was still a few meters out. Izuku gave a wry smile at the creativity of the insults coming from the boy suspended in the air unable to move. You know what, F this. And 𝗵𝘃𝗀 reached for his left hand with his right and pulled a pin and suddenly his gauntlet was flying towards 𝐲𝗏. Izuku reached out for it with the force and suspended it in the air quickly, careful to not lose his grip on 𝗵𝘃𝗀 or set off the potential explosive as 𝐲𝗏 dodged out of the way. 𝐲𝗏 shot ice at it and completely encased it in a mini glacier. The resulting explosion didn't cause any damage or even shatter the very thick ice. This was in part because Izuku used the force to help contain it and reinforce 𝐲𝗏's ice. They heard All Might's voice over their comms, 𝗵𝘃𝗀, that kind of weapon is dangerous to use inside. The building's structural integrity could become compromised. Do not use the other gauntlet or the hero team will win automatically. As 𝗵𝘃𝗀 was yelling about how unfair that was, Izuku looked over to see 𝐲𝗏 standing up and dusting himself off. Izuku brought his capture tape up and wrapped it around 𝗵𝘃𝗀's flailing legs from behind. All Might announced that he was out and should return to the control room. 𝗵𝘃𝗀 did not seem pleased at all as Izuku lowered him to the ground. F nerd, I wanted a fight, not this PPSHT. A fight ended without violence is a success, 𝗵𝘃𝗀. As Gandhi once said, I object to violence because when it appears to do good, the good is only temporary. The evil it does is permanent. I will end any fight without violence I can, especially in training like this. I had complete control of your body with my quirk. I could have rammed you into the walls and floor until you were unconscious and bloody. In the end, the results would be no different. But this way you are healthy and my goals were still achieved. Violence and fighting are not always the answer. Now if you'll excuse us, we have an exercise to continue. Izuku turned his back on 𝗵𝘃𝗀, who was strangely quiet, and walked next to 𝐲𝗏 towards the stairs that the angry boy had come down from. Izuku could still feel their two enemies on the top floor so he said, I bet they're on the top floor, let's start there and work our way down. 𝐲𝗏 nodded as they made their way up the flights of stairs. Do you really believe that? Izuku looked at him, what exactly are you referring to? That stuff you said to 𝗵𝘃𝗀 about violence. Yes, it's proven true over and over again through history. Conflicts ended without violence often result in longer-lasting peace than those where one side is forced to capitulate. Not to mention the human toll. With a quirk like mine, I could easily kill or hurt someone terribly. I'd rather not do that, even to an enemy if I can help it. But sometimes you have to, against villains and the like. Perhaps some irrational villains. But if you had 6 heroes ready to fight one low-level villain, do you think the villain would surrender, try to run, or try to fight? I imagine run or surrender if they're rational. Exactly. So offering a villain the chance to surrender is something I will do every time I can. I do this because a fight can cause more harm, not just to the villain but to the surrounding area and people too. It's not always possible, of course, and when we reach the other 2 upstairs, we'll try to use the element of surprise. I suggest you go for 𝐻𝐡𝐬 and I'll take care of 𝐸𝐸. Speed won't help him if I can get him lifted off the ground like I did 𝗵𝘃𝗀𝐻𝐿. I want to try something with the capture tape too. Need to work on my fine control. 𝐻𝐡𝐬 nodded at him as they reached the top floor. Izuku opened the door and looked out. There was no floor at the landing. It looked as if it had been melted away. 𝐻𝐡𝐬's acid, 𝐻𝐡𝐬 said. We could go down a level and try to come up a different way. Izuku thought for a moment. Do you trust me? When 𝐻𝐡𝐬 nodded, Izuku said, will you let me lift you over to where the floor starts again? 𝐻𝐡𝐬 agreed and Izuku gently lifted 𝐻𝐡𝐬 up and dropped him where the ground was sturdy. 𝐻𝐡𝐬 was ready to reinforce his flooring with ice if need be, but he indicated it was safe, so Izuku executed a small force jump and landed next to him. They were quiet and Izuku held a finger in front of his mouth in a shushing motion. 𝐻𝐡𝐬 nodded again, not much of a talker to begin with, and Izuku led them forward. He knew exactly what room the villains were in but couldn't explain how he knew that, so they stopped at every door on the way and checked the rooms quickly. They searched 3 rooms before they heard voices. Long do you think there is left until we win? I'm not sure, perhaps 5 minutes. They'll never make it here to our secret lair with all the traps we put on the 4th floor. You're really getting into this, aren't you, 𝐸𝐸? Izuku smirked at 𝐻𝐡𝐬 and pantomimed a plan, namely the same thing they talked about before, and 𝐻𝐡𝐬 nodded too and counted down from 5 on his fingers. He used the force to blow the door right off its hinges and bang into the far wall. This served to startle the 2 villains in the room, and Izuku lifted up 𝐸𝐸 with his telekinesis before he could even make a move. Ack, heroes! Unhand me, scum! 𝐸𝐸 said. Surrender, and this will be over quickly, villains. What could Izuku say? 𝐸𝐸's role-playing got him into the mood. Never. 𝐻𝐡𝐬 said as 𝐻𝐡𝐬 shot off an ice attack which encased her from the waist down in a chunk of ice. She immediately started using her acid to try and melt the ice. While 𝐻𝐡𝐬 was securing the acid-spitting girl, Izuku used the force on his capture tape and it sped across the room, wrapping around 𝐸𝐸's legs tightly. All Might announced 𝐸𝐸 was captured and Izuku lowered him to the ground, pleased that he was able to use the tape so well with his telekinesis. While Izuku was doing that, 𝐻𝐡𝐬 had walked over to the bomb and touched it. All Might announced that the heroes won, just as 𝐻𝐡𝐬 had melted the ice with her acid and was free. Oh man, that you guys aren't allowed to be paired together again. You're too OP. Izuku smiles at her. 𝐻𝐡𝐬 and I may be strong, but this whole exercise was much harder for the villain team than the heroes. If 𝐻𝐡𝐬 and I were defending, much of what we did would have been ineffective. Though we would have used other strategies, like 𝐻𝐡𝐬 covering all the stairs in ice, making it strong for you guys to get you here. Or even encasing the bomb in a solid block of ice so you couldn't reach it. Or I could have used my quirk to lift the bomb high above the roof where you couldn't reach it, or, Midoriya, they get it. Oh, of course. I guess we should get back. Good job, guys. I had a lot of fun, and I hope you did too. And 𝐻𝐡𝐬, call me Izuku. 𝐻𝐡𝐬 didn't reply but did glance at him longer than Izuku thought was strictly necessary as they left the building. Upon their return to the control room, they were greeted with cheers. The spiky redhead, Kirishima, said, "That was insane. You guys worked so well together. Do you like practice together or something? You looked like pros." Izuku smiled at his classmates who were excitedly chattering. "We've never worked together before, but I've had a lot of training, and it seems like 𝐻𝐡𝐬 has too. It was just good fortune that we worked so well together. Settle down, everyone. It was a good display of heroics indeed," All Might said. He was looking at Izuku with a speculative gleam in his eyes. Izuku hoped he didn't have another teacher suspecting him of being anything more than a student. So who do you think was the MVP of that fight? A tall black-haired girl that Izuku was pretty sure was named Yaoyorozu raised her hand and All Might called on her. Well, there were several standout performances, but if you don't take into account the overwhelming strength of Midoriya and Todoroki, I think you have to give it to Ishido. She and Ida worked well together and she had some brilliant ideas for traps that would have slowed down or even stopped other teams. However, it was just the luck of the draw that the heroes had quirks which could counter them easily. Izuku wondered if there were more traps that they just missed and asked Ishido. Oh yeah, if you hadn't been able to cross the gap by the stairs, we set up a ton of traps on the level below. We were planning on you going down there and slog through them. Izuku nodded at her and smiled. It was a good plan and could have stymied other teams really well. She smiled and All Might got everyone's attention again and said, "Very good, Yaoyorozu. I agree with you that Ishido had a great plan and executed it well, but factors were not in her favor. I know you did not hear any audio, but I have to say after hearing it that young Midoriya is the VIP, especially because we cannot discount raw power in a real fight. Nothing in the whole exercise slowed him down or stopped him at all. He made the right calls at every step of the way and had solid reasons backing him up. He worked with his partner, who also did an excellent job, and didn't disregard his ideas or suggestions when he disagreed with them. A true team player and even giving an inspirational talk to one of the villains. But you all did very well and it was a success all around because you all gained some very important experience. Well done you five. Let's get the next group set up." Izuku enjoyed the rest of the class. Watching the groups go, some successful and some not, were fascinating. None of the other fights seemed to go as well as Shoto's and his battle, but all of the students made good use of their quirks and skills. After the class was dismissed and they changed and All Might was waiting outside the locker room. "Ah, young Midoriya, do you have a moment to talk?" Izuku had no idea what the hero wanted, opened himself to the force, but it was strong to get a reading off the man who was radiating brightly before him. "Of course, sensei." All Might's already large smile widened even more and he led Izuku to a small teacher's lounge. Izuku waved at his friends who were leaving for the day. When they were seated in the lounge, All Might said, "You did very well today, my boy. Not only was your quirk usage measured but so was your temperament. You were in complete control of the battlefield the entire time, and it was rather impressive for a freshman in high school, if I do say so myself." Izuku held in a sigh and smiled at the hero. "Thank you, All Might. I appreciate you saying that. I've trained strong for UA and the hero course. It shows. May I ask what kind of training you undertook? Your philosophy, as well as your technique, was very well done." Izuku pulled out one of the prepared answers he and his MSTR had arranged. "My mother's quirk is somewhat similar to mine. Hers is attract small objects, which she trained well and she maximized its effectiveness. She can be pretty intimidating when she goes all out. My quirk is more of a general telekinetic quirk. As to philosophy, I've lived all over the world, traveling with Mom for her work. I picked up a lot, and we spent about 6 months in India when I was about 12 and I picked up a lot about non-violence and ahimsa. It stuck with me that isn't it better to end a fight before it begins than to engage in violence, if possible?" "Absolutely, young Midoriya. Not many 15-year-olds would think that way though. It's very mature, and I know some pro heroes who have yet to grasp those concepts." Izuku smiled at him, relieved this was where the conversation was going. "Well, not everyone can be a symbol of peace, I suppose." All Might let out a large laugh and patted him on the shoulder. "Indeed not." Then he seemed to sigh, the smile never dropping. "Indeed not," he repeated. "Thank you for humoring an old man. I'll let you go before it gets too late." "Any time, All Might." Izuku left the room and headed towards his homeroom to pick up a book he needed for homework, which he left there. After picking it up, he walked out the main entrance where he saw Shoto sitting on the steps looking at his phone. "Shoto. I thought you'd be gone already like everyone else. I was glad we were paired up today, you were a good partner." What's up? He sat down next to the heterochromatic boy. Shoto looked up and was silent for a moment. I don't understand you, Midoriya. Call me Izuku, and I'm sorry. What do you mean? I'll try to help. Why are you trying so strong to be my friend? You seem like you could use one. It has nothing to do with my father. Izuku paused. Shoto's father was a hero if Izuku remembered right. Your dad was that fire guy who I met here a few months ago. Shoto nodded. I don't really know all the Japanese heroes well yet. I mean other than the teachers and All Might. Is your dad a big hero here? Shoto looked at him confused as if he was trying to see if Izuku was lying. He's the number 2 hero in Japan, 𝗫𝗫𝗏. Wait, I thought that bird guy was number 2, Falcon. No, Hawks, right. Hawks is number 3. Oh. Well, regardless, I don't care who your parents are. I like you and we work well together. So why not be friends? We'll be rivals if you go pro. So? Are you saying heroes aren't friends with other heroes? That's crazy. No, that's not it. It's just people usually only want to be my friend because of who my father is. Well, that's not me. I just want to be your friend because you seem like someone who would be a good friend. Shoto didn't say anything to that but seemed more relaxed. Can I ask you a question? Feel free to tell me, it's none of my business, but you only use ice, and that only comes from your right side. However, your left side, if your hair is anything to go by, is something else. Does your quirk have a second part on your left side? My quirk is half hot, half cold. My right side controls ice and my left controls fire. That's an amazing quirk. And together they regulate your temperature, I'm sure. Why don't you use your flames more? I didn't see you use them in the tests yesterday or in training today. Shoto was quiet for a moment. That is rather personal. Oh, you don't need to answer, I am just a curious person. Shoto paused and thought for a moment. It's fine. My ice comes from my mother and the fire comes from my father. I am trying to prove to him that I don't need his power to be a hero. I want to be the number 1 without his power. Izuku made a noise of understanding. I see what you are saying. But it's not his power, it's yours. His power is just fire. You have both fire and ice. It's one quirk and it's been yours since you got it. You don't understand. I don't know what kind of things you've gone through or why you do what you do, but I once knew a man with a bad luck quirk. Shoto blinked at the seemingly random change of topic. Everything he did turned out poorly. But he was the happiest man I ever met. Do you know why? Because your focus determines your reality. What is luck, besides things not going your way? Izuku paused. So he changed what he wanted. He changed his perspective and looked at life differently and turned a handicap into a benefit. You can do that too, I think. Shoto, a tall flaming man said. Let's go. He was about to turn around when he looked closer at Izuku. You're that American boy who was distracting Shoto a few months ago, aren't you? Izuku blinked. This man gave off waves of anger and aggression in the force. He's the number 2 hero. Izuku idly wondered if he was one of the heroes All Might was talking about when he said some pros don't understand anything other than violence. I wouldn't say I was distracting him, I bumped into him though, yes. Your Japanese is atrocious. I'm surprised they let you into UA. Izuku smiled and laughed at that. Shoto looked at him like he was crazy. I like to think I can get by. Accents are always strong for me because I know a few other languages besides Japanese and English. There was an awkward moment after Izuku said that, and the atmosphere was not at all like what it was when it was just Shoto and Izuku talking. This is who you pick for a friend, Shoto. You can do better. Isn't that Yaoyorozu girl in your class? She is, however, I worked with Izuku during a training exercise today and we became friends, Shoto said. Izuku beamed both at the use of his first name as well as the other boy calling them friends. Success. Let's go, we'll be late, 𝗫𝐬 said. Bye, 𝐀𝐦. I'll see you tomorrow. Sit with me at lunch, okay? Izuku said with a small grin. 𝗫𝐬's lip curled upwards and he turned away, not even acknowledging Izuku. I'll see if Yaoyorozu wants to join us as well. 𝐀𝐦 had never seen someone act this way around his father. He'd probably pay for it when they were training later, but 𝐀𝐦 sent a small smile and wave at Midoriya. Izuku grinned back. Izuku wondered how could someone so grumpy be a popular hero. School the next day started off with Aizawa-sensei giving some feedback about the hero training the day before. Bakugo, you need to stop and think sometimes. Have you heard the saying only fools rush in? It is not always accurate, but yesterday it was. Taking some time to make a plan and working with your allies is never a bad idea. Midoriya, your experience continues to shine through, was all Aizawa said to him. Probably trying to intimidate him or something. Izuku just smiled and thanked his teacher. After several other students got some pointers. Everyone would get a written review of their performances. Now you need to pick a class representative. This led to the class breaking out into excited murmurs and people nominating themselves for the role. Izuku felt that Ida would be a fine candidate for this position, and decided to vote for him. After all, it was Ida's idea to have a vote in the first place. When the votes were counted, Izuku was surprised that he had gotten 5 votes. Which was made more impressive since he didn't even vote for himself. Yaoyorozu got second place with 3 votes. He realized quickly that he had no idea what a class representative did, and so he probably was not the best fit for this. As he was standing in front of the class with Yaoyorozu, during his acceptance speech, Izuku said, I appreciate the confidence you showed me, but I've never attended Japanese schooling before, so I have no idea what this responsibility entails. That said, I suggest that Yaoyorozu be our class representative and I be her deputy. That way I can learn the ropes from someone who knows better than me. He bowed before them and Yaoyorozu looked very pleased and accepted with the support of the class. He spots with her and she gave a small speech thanking the class and Izuku for their faith in her. After that, the morning classes were normal. Izuku was getting antsy and was glad that lunch was coming quickly. When they were dismissed from English, he walked over to Yaoyorozu and said, would you care to sit with Ida, Uraraka, and I at lunch? I think 𝐀𝐦 may join us as well. Yaoyorozu smiled and looked pleased to be asked and said she would. He glanced at 𝐀𝐦 who was standing up, looking over at them. Izuku smiled. The force told him there was something up with 𝐀𝐦. He seemed to be favoring his left side more than normal as he walked towards the classroom door. 𝐀𝐦, 1 second. He turned to Uraraka who was standing with Ida and talking to Yaoyorozu. You guys go ahead. I need to talk to 𝐀𝐦 for a second. They nodded and left, and only 𝐀𝐦 and he were left in the room. Izuku was packing his bag. Are you okay, 𝐀𝐦? You seem to be favoring your left side. 𝐀𝐦 stared at him like he was a puzzle that he couldn't quite solve. I'm fine. You're sure? I can heal small stuff if you need me to. He looked like he was going to continue denying there was anything wrong but just sighed. I strained some muscles yesterday in training. I can manage though, I wouldn't want to put you out. It's no problem. Here, Izuku said as he knelt down, his hand reached out to touch the exact spot causing the trouble. 𝐀𝐦 looked confused that Izuku could get to the sore spot without even looking, seeing the bruise, or telling him where he was hurt. But 𝐀𝐦 didn't say anything. Izuku used the force and healed the small, but painful injury. There we go, much better. I'm sorry I didn't notice yesterday after class. 𝐀𝐦 paused. It happened at home when I was training with my father. Oh, okay. Oh, indeed. It takes almost no effort for me to do this for you, so please let me know in the future and I'd really be happy to help you out. Especially if you have any more training accidents at home. Izuku paused. And if you ever need to talk, I'm here. 𝐀𝐦 didn't say anything for a few moments as they walked towards the entrance. Thank you. I still am not sure why you'd spend so much time helping me. Well, putting aside the fact that we're friends, even if we weren't I'd help you. I want you to know honestly that I will do this anytime, anyplace, okay? Shoto didn't respond verbally but nodded at him. They continued the rest of the walk to the cafeteria in companionable silence. Arriving, Shoto pulled out a bento and sat at the table with their friends, and Izuku went to go purchase lunch. After returning to the table he was happy everyone was getting along well. Shoto seemed quiet, per usual. Uraraka, Ida, and Yaoyorozu were having an animated conversation about the latest hero news, and Izuku started contributing as he could. Before long there was a lull in the conversation and Izuku said, "Yaoyorozu, can I ask you about your quirk? It is one of the most interesting quirks that I've ever seen. Can you make anything? I've only seen you make non-biological items so far. What part of your body is used to make things? How much mass can you create with your regular diet? Also, not to be crude, but if you make it from proteins or fats, as I expect, why are you so lithe? Wouldn't you have more material to use if you were heavier? Not that I'm saying you should gain some weight or anything, I'm just curious." "And, Izuku?" Uraraka interrupted with a laugh. "Maybe give her a chance to answer some questions before asking her 5 more. Izuku blushed. "Sorry, Yaoyorozu. I can get carried away sometimes." She smiled at him. "You're interested in quirks?" "Very. They're fascinating. My mom travels a lot for work and I travel with her a lot of the time. Seeing all the amazing people and quirks all over the world is so interesting." "That's fascinating. I've done some traveling but mostly tourist places with my family." "It sounds like you've been around a bit more than that." "Oh yeah. My mom and I have traveled like 90% of my life. We didn't even have a house before we moved here, we'd just go from place to place." "That's amazing, Izuku. What's the coolest place you've ever been to?" Uraraka asked. Everyone was looking at him as he pondered the question. "That's tough to say, honestly. There's so many fascinating cultures and people out there." He pauses again. "I think it was when I was in Brazil. We were way outside of cities and towns. We stayed with a small tribe on the Amazon River. They were experiencing issues with illegal logging and poachers trespassing on tribal lands, and so my mom was sent there by her NGO to help sort the situation out. Their culture was so different from anything I'd seen. The way they used and revered their quirks was fascinating. You know, a lot of first world countries, there are good quirks, useless quirks, and villainous quirks. But there, no matter the quirk, it was a sacred thing for them and their entire village. They honored and venerated their quirks. Even the simplest quirks had amazing impacts on the whole community. They had a rain speaker who could not only call rain when they needed it but control the chemical and mineral content of the rain. It doesn't sound like much, but if you can make rainwater with all nutrients you need and with nothing that would hurt them, then they will grow really, really well. There was a woman with a quirk to control bugs, one to ward off wild animals, one to attract them. All of their quirks were used for the benefit of the tribe. None of the quirks were spectacular or showy, but they were each so impressive in how they used them. Everyone at the table was looking at him. Sorry. I kind of went off there." "No, that's fascinating, Izuku," Uraraka said. "You must have so many cool stories." Izuku blushed. "Oh, I dunno about that. Most of the time we were in big cities and my mom would be in meetings while I did virtual school." Another practiced lie. In fact, since he had been taken as a Padawan, life had been almost non-stop missions to various parts of the world. "Still, that really is interesting. I look forward to hearing more from you." She paused. "You asked about my quirk earlier, and so I'll tell you all a bit. I'm able to create any non-living material from my fat cells. As you guessed, the more I eat the more." Yaoyorozu was interrupted by a shrill alarm and pure pandemonium around them as students panicked and ran every which way trying to evacuate as the alarm was telling them to. Izuku looked around and reached out with the force. He didn't feel imminent danger, but there was something elusive that he couldn't quite put his finger on. Ida and Uraraka stood up and disappeared into the sea of people, but Shoto just looked at him and shrugged. He didn't seem concerned, and frankly, Izuku wasn't either. Once the stampede was over, he'd evacuate with everyone else. Someone had to be last. Shoto and Yaoyorozu seemed to be thinking the same thing. Ida apparently had gotten everyone's attention and calmed the evacuation stampede down, and soon after that, the alarm had stopped. Yaoyorozu, Shoto, and Izuku hadn't actually left the cafeteria when it was announced that everyone could return to where they were until the next class. The rest of the day passed without incident. But as he was walking to the train station with Ida and Uraraka, and they passed the gate where the reporters had swarmed in from, and where the gate should have been was covered in police tape, Izuku felt a sense of dread from the force. The gate seemed to have somehow been disintegrated. Izuku wondered what it could possibly mean. The next few days were pretty normal for Izuku and the students at UA. Mstr Inko had just left for her mission to Taipei, so Izuku woke up alone and got ready for school. He arrived with a few minutes to spare and waved at Ida, who looked like he'd been in the room for a while. After morning classes, Izuku and his friends were walking to lunch together. He had been sitting with Shoto, Yaoyorozu, Uraraka, and Ida. Tsuyu Azui had started to sit with them, and she was a very frank individual. Izuku liked her. She was very informal and seemingly the only person who could call him Izuku with a straight face. She even asked him, and everyone else, to call her Tsu. Needless to say, Izuku was enjoying his new friends. Thinking of how non-Jedi this mission was, there was almost nothing more different from his life as a Jedi than the casual camaraderie he had with these people his age that he'd only known for a week. Perhaps it was that they were all in a new environment at the same time, but Izuku had never had an easier time making deep connections and friends. Sure, he had some old crushmates from his time as an initiate who he considered friends, but that was different. He barely ever saw his crushmates since becoming a Padawan. They were more like how Izuku imagined he would feel about cousins who lived far away. He could always count on them, but he only really saw them a few times a year. They texted occasionally, but more often than not Jedi missions were not cell phone friendly. But this, with his friends at UA, it was different. Maybe it was because he saw them every day and was with them almost all day, but part of Izuku was sad that this mission was only temporary. He was basing his entire relationship with these people on a lie. They may not want anything to do with him after the mission ends. He didn't know how much he would even be allowed to stay in touch with them after that. The Jedi were pretty strict about attachments, and Izuku was well aware of the fact that he may be starting to get attached. He made a mental note to talk to his Mstr about this when she returned from Taipei. They had almost reached the cafeteria when Izuku felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see who it was and saw Bakugo. Izuku smiled at the other boy. "Hey, what's up?" he asked. "I want to talk to you, nerd." "Okay, Bakugo. What about?" Shoto noticed that Izuku had stopped and was looking at Bakugo with suspicion. "This isn't any of your business, half and half," Bakugo said, noticing the other boy looking. "I just need to talk to him for a minute." Shoto looked at Izuku, who shrugged and smiled. He had nothing to worry about. It's not as if Bakugo was going to try to beat him up or anything. With that settled, Bakugo led Izuku to a nearby door outside. They went to a quiet corner of the building away from any students, and Bakugo said, "You're hiding something. I can tell. I want to know what it is. I know Aizawa suspects you. He keeps talking about your experience. Well, Aizawa-sensei thinks I am a very covert vigilante, which is, of course, absurd. I have no idea how anyone in this school would have time to be a vigilante with the amount of homework we have." Bakugo looks at Izuku, eyes narrowing. "Tch. You're too confident. In that fight, you could have taken out all three of us. Hell, you probably could have taken out a couple of teams on your own. You would have been able to take everyone out with no collateral damage." He paused. "I don't know if Aizawa is right about you or not, but I know something is up." I'll be watching you, and if you're working with villains or some other stupid SHT, I'll end you. Good to know. I mean, I deny working with villains, but that's what someone working with villains would say. So I will let you believe what you want and warn you not to act on this unless you're ready to put up a better fight than you did yesterday. Izuku didn't like talking this way, but he felt it was the only thing that someone like 𝗵𝘃𝐻 would understand. 𝗵𝘃𝐻 looked a little surprised that Izuku was talking back at all. But it was time to de-escalate. Look, I am not your enemy. I am not a vigilante. I am certainly not a villain. I'm just a 15-year-old student of UA looking to make the most of my time here and to do good. We can even be friends if you want. Feel free to sit with my friends and me at lunch. 𝗵𝘃𝐻 scoffed. But we don't have to be. I'll have your back when the need arises, and I hope you'll have mine. We don't have to like each other to work together. 𝗵𝘃𝐻 looked at him for a long moment. Yeah, whatever. And walked away. Izuku shook his head, not sure of why 𝗵𝘃𝐻 confronted him, but maybe the loud boy was more perceptive than Izuku originally thought. He joined his friends in the cafeteria for lunch. They asked what 𝗵𝘃𝐻 wanted and Izuku shrugged and said, I think he was trying to intimidate me. It was kind of weird. He may have accused me of being a villain, but I doubt he really believes that. It seems like he was just being his charming self. You're about the least villainous person in our class, Shoto said. Izuku blushed as the rest of the table agreed. I appreciate that. It's not a big deal. 𝗵𝘃𝐻 sees the world in a different way than most people. I doubt he meant anything by it. The conversation continued for a while, but all that Izuku did was make sure no one was going to confront 𝗵𝘃𝐻 to defend his honor or something else from the plot, a movie made for teenagers. After lunch, Aizawa-sensei sprung a field trip on them. They were going to a different part of the UA campus to undertake some rescue exercises. After he announced this, he had everyone go and put their hero costumes on, and they were dismissed to the locker rooms to change. Everyone was excited about the practical experience they would get. I'm glad we will be doing rescue work today. It is a fundamental part of heroics. I wonder what heroes will be teaching us. Ida said as they changed. Somehow his arms were still making exaggerated movements. Yeah, this is going to awesome. Kirishima said. Yeah, learning new ways to use our quirks to help people. Kaminari said. And how to look fabulous doing it, Aoyama added. Izuku had gotten to know the names of his classmates and had a handle on their personalities. They all seemed to be good people, even 𝗵𝘃𝐻, who would make good heroes. Some of them would say stupid things or act like idiots, but 𝗬𝗡𝗏 assured him that was just how normal teenagers acted. Having been trained from infancy, Izuku was thankfully not as prone to bouts of teenage idiocy. But he still had his moments. They finished changing and met up at a bus near the back of the school. Aizawa-sensei was waiting for them, looking dead on his feet and like he'd rather be elsewhere. Normal for him. And the gaggle of students gathered around the door to the bus, waiting for it to open. Yaoyorozu was trying to organize the class and failing. Everyone was too excited. They got on the bus after Aizawa ordered them to. The ride would not be too long, only about 10 minutes, and they were still on the UA's huge campus. On the ride, everyone was relaxing and talking with each other. Izuku was near most of his friends towards the front of the bus. Tsu, who was sitting near him, said, Izuku, your quirk is very powerful. Do you take after your parents? Izuku smiled at her. A little. Mom has a similar quirk but can only pull objects to her, and my dad could breathe fire. I've just trained my quirk very well. Well, you're lucky yours is so good. My hardening quirk is kind of basic, Kirishima said. That's not true. Your quirk is so versatile. Granted, you don't have much long-range capability, but if you train yourself right you could be an immovable object or an unstoppable force. It's almost the perfect quirk for offense or defense. Kirishima was blushing. That was a really manly thing to say, bro. It was true. You also have a great personality for heroics. I could see you going far, Kirishima, Izuku said. Say something nice about me now. Mina chimed in. Izuku was about to but was interrupted by Bakugo, you nerds. None of you hold a candle to me. I'm going to be number one. You do have a great quirk for heroics too, Bakugo, Izuku replied. But you have the personality of a clogged sewer, Kaminari said with a grin. Bakugo looked like he was going to get up and punch the electric blonde in the face, but Izuku spoke up. Well, honestly, a nice personality is somewhat important, but not needed to be a top hero. Look at 𝗫𝗫 for example. No offense Shoto. Shoto just shrugged and looked interested in what Izuku was going to say next. He's undeniably powerful and good at hero work, but he's nowhere near as approachable as most of the other top 10 heroes. A lot of people are intimidated by him, which could limit his effectiveness. All Might and Hawks always top the online opinion polls from what I can see, but that doesn't change the effectiveness of a hero's abilities. I think you'll be a great hero, Bakugo. Izuku had learned after a few days of school that he needed to brush up on popular Japanese heroes to understand half of what his classmates talked about. Izuku glanced at Shoto, who didn't seem angry by his judgment of 𝗫𝗫 and looked thoughtful. TCH, as if I give a flying F what you think. Wow, he can't even accept a compliment, Tsu said. I don't need any of you losers to be the best. Maybe not right now, but someday you might, Izuku said. Bakugo stood, but before he could respond, the bus came to a stop and the door opened. We're here, Aizawa said before walking off the bus. No one moved for a second, still not totally used to their homeroom teacher, but before long they were all disembarking the bus. The bus was parked in front of a massive dome. Aizawa was standing next to another figure in a full-on spacesuit. It's the space hero, 13. She's my favorite. Uraraka said. Izuku knew of her vaguely. Her quirk was very good for rescue work, especially after disasters or villain attacks, because it could break down any material as it was consumed by her. Welcome students. 13 said. This is my pride and joy, the Unforeseen Simulation Joint, or the USJ. She led the group into the building and it was very impressive. Somehow it seemed larger on the inside than the outside. Izuku thought it might be because it went underground some distance, and as they entered they were near the top of the different areas. 13 gave a very impassioned speech about how dangerous quirks could be and the responsible use of them, of which Izuku approved. As they walked in, Izuku was impressed as he looked around. There seemed to be various areas with different environments for rescue. There was a lake, ruins, a few domes that looked like they could be rain and fire. Plus a few more. It looked like UA spared no expense here. He could certainly see why 13 was so proud of the facilities. As Izuku was listening to his teachers and taking in the sights, the force screamed a warning in his head. Danger. Approaching danger. He looked around and didn't see anything. But the sense got worse and worse. He was standing next to Shoto, and Izuku's frantic looking around and tensing up had gotten his friend's attention. Sensei, Izuku said, interrupting his teacher talking about the exercises that they were going to do. The teacher stopped and looked at him. Something's wrong. Something's coming. Everyone was looking at him and Aizawa seemed to take him at his word. 13, take them students out of here. But we just got here. Kaminari said. Is that part of the exercise? Kirishima asked. Everyone turned to look and suddenly there was black mist all over the USJ's courtyard. Walking from it was a horde of ominous-looking figures. No, it's not. They're villains. 13, get them out of here now. I'll hold them off, Aizawa said as he jumped down from the landing towards the mass of villains. 13 was ushering the students to the exit. Izuku hesitated, knowing that his teacher would be at a disadvantage in fighting against so many enemies. Shoto looked back at him with a raised eyebrow. The message he was trying to send was clear. Izuku let a small amused huff at his friend being able to say so much with a simple glance and started to move towards the exit with the rest of the class. Unfortunately, they were cut off as black mist appeared in front of them and it eventually formed a nebulous figure. Greetings children, it is a pleasure to meet you. We are the League of Villains. Our information said All Might would be here, but he seems to be absent. That's unfortunate. He seemed to spread out and get larger. I suppose in the end it doesn't matter. At this point, Bakugo and Kirishima jumped towards the mist villain and there was a large explosion. As the smoke cleared, Kirishima said, "Did you think we were going to just stand around and let you tear this place to shreds?" The misty voice sounded as the smoke continued to clear. "You live up to your school's reputation, but you should be more careful, children. Otherwise, someone might get hurt. Get out of the way, right now." 13 said to Bakugo and Kirishima. "I'll separate you across this facility where our minions will proceed to torture you all to death. Farewell." The black smoke spread around all of them and suddenly the force promoted Izuku to move and he threw himself at Shoto. The other boy looked surprised for a second, but they were outside of the smoke and they heard the sounds of students being buffeted by winds. Shoto looked like he was about to say something when the black mist extended from where it was and surrounded the two of them. The last thing Izuku heard was his classmates' screams as the darkness overtook them.